Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, February 11th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the unelectability of the Republican Party at this current point in time. Now, before you click off this video, before you disagree with me in the comment section or potentially agree with me, I want to take your direction and your point of focus and look at some of these more recent polls from a bunch of different news sources and a bunch of different polling firms as a means of comparing it to the generic ballot. Now, I have seen many people argue that I have, skewed my content to make it so it is anti-Republican, but in the very greatest sense, I truly try to be very accurate with you guys, and I think that what I'm going to bring with you today is that it is something that will cause a lot of disagreement, but I do think is very, very true. I've hinted at it, and I've said it explicitly in previous videos, but I've never made an actual video talking about how the Republican Party has a problem with courting voters that is very apparent at this point in time. The one poll in specific that really grabbed my attention was one that I saw from CNN. Now, CNN doesn't do polls that often. They tend to avoid it, or they let their counterpart on the polling firms that they publish on their news source, but don't actually do them directly. Now, CNN released a poll that was taken between January 10th and February 6th, and I'm not going to treat it like it's some gold standard in polling, but it definitely is very, very accurate and historically has been many of these pollsters that agree with the numbers that CNN is putting out. But CNN released a number that showed that Joe Biden has a negative 15% net approval rating nationwide, meaning 57% of the nation disapproves of him and just 42% approves. Now, that number is bad. Anybody can tell you that. Anybody looking at it from the incumbency status, will see this as a means of this automatically means that Joe Biden is either one, going to lose re-election, or the Democrats are going to have a significant blowback in the midterms, or both. And I think that both is probably something that could be a fair estimation and a fair analysis of what we are seeing so far. But the problem is, for the GOP in specific, is that the CNN poll here shows Joe Biden down 15 points nationwide. But on the same exact group, on the same exact, people that are being polled here, the sample, what you find is that the Republican Party in this same CNN poll only puts the Republican Party ahead by 1. The good news for the Democrats is that they get 43% of the vote in this poll. Can you guess Joe Biden's approval rating? Well, I just told you it was 42%. And the fact that there are voters out there that are disapproving of Biden that are voting for the Democratic Party is something the GOP should worry about. But considering that 57% of the nation is opposed to Joe Biden currently, yet only 44% are willing to side with the GOP, that's when you start to see some major concerns on the GOP side. The largest GOP advantage that I have seen is from the Trafalgar group that shows the Republican Party ahead by 14 points. But that is an outlier. You start to see the average at about Republican plus 4. Well, if Biden is down 14 points and Republicans are on average up 4 points, what does that tell you? That tells you there is a significant portion of the vote that moves away from the Republican Party when asked that question, but is very willing to say that they disapprove of Joe Biden. Now, one thing that I do want to say is that we rarely take this into account because party loyalty has always been an understanding in American politics. But I would caution that in saying that Joe Biden doesn't always get that party loyalty thing that you might think. Looking at the amount of left-wing American voters that seem to be upset with Joe Biden, they could very well be answering these polls and saying, actually, I disapprove of Joe Biden's job as president of the United States. But would they vote for a Republican in the generic ballot? The answer is no. And I think that is something that could be a very real problem for comparing the job approval rating to the actuality results of the election. Joe Biden does not have a grip on his base like Donald Trump does. You see, the difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden is that Donald Trump is able to keep his 40% of the nation solidly no matter what happens. Even, the day of the insurrection, what you saw was that his approval rating, quote unquote, plummeted. And that was plummeted relative to the rest of his, White House, just simply because the approval rating had always remained consistent, 41, 42, 43, 44, and fluctuated around there for 3 to 4 years. But what you found was that even after the insurrection, the approval rating only dipped to about 38%. The fact that 38% of the nation was willing to say that they approved of Donald Trump at the lowest point of his presidency, I'm not one to try to argue that, Donald Trump should be disapproved of or not, but when you see the events that occurred, when you see the second impeachment trial, when you see that he is someone who doubled down on delegitimizing the 2020 election, yet nearly 4 in 10 of America's voters said that they approved of the job that Donald Trump was doing. I mean, it was something that is quite interesting to see. You know, George W. Bush didn't have an effect like Donald Trump. George W. Bush fell out of public favor, and the Democrats landslided in 2006 and 2008. Bill Clinton didn't have a grip on his base like you might have seen with President Trump. President Trump did, and I think we use him as a means of comparing, especially me, because I've only been politically cognizant for, maybe 10 years now at most. What we're looking at here is that the approval rating shouldn't be necessarily compared to someone like Donald Trump, because Donald Trump had a very core base that was willing to vote for the GOP no matter what. But that isn't happening this time. Because I guarantee you there are Democrats out there that are saying that they disapprove of Joe Biden and also are willing to vote for Democrats, or will say they're undecided right now and might even not decide to vote in 2022, which could be a very big thing. There are voters out there that are defeated, feel like, the Democratic trifecta did nothing for them, so why would they come out and vote again? If they voted for the first time in the general and then voted in a runoff in Georgia, what is enticing you to vote out again? There are a bunch of promises that the Democratic Party was unable to keep up. So moving beyond that, besides the fact that there are voters out there that I think, could be moving to this idea of the electability problem for the Republican Party, there is also a bit of concern here that I think I've seen raised from the GOP that argue. In 2010 and 2014, the Republican Party didn't get their lead until later down the line. 2010 was actually a year in which the Republicans started off with a pretty much of a lead, but nothing super substantial. They were up by just a few percentage points in the early 2010 and finished on Election Day, being up 9.4%. Even CNN had them up 10 percentage points on Election Day. Gallup had them up 15 points. The Republican Party absolutely decimated the Democratic Party in 2010. What you saw was one of the largest Democratic majorities in the Senate for quite some time, taken down to just, I believe, 53 to 47. And looking at the House seats there, what you also found was that the Democratic Party lost 63 seats in the House of Representatives, with the fact that the Republican Party won by 7 points nationwide. Knowing our national environment, knowing our national composition and makeup, if the Republican Party was to win by 7 points nationwide, that would be it for the Democratic Party. No chance at retaining the Senate, no chance at retaining any of the competitive House races, and no chance at those governorships too, because clearly the national environment is so heavily lopsided in favor of the GOP. And the same thing happened in 2014. The Democrats and Republicans were neck and neck, and we didn't actually see a clear takeaway for the GOP until later down the line. While 2014 isn't similar to what we are seeing right now in terms of the approval rating, 2010, actually, neither of these 2 years are similar. 2014 might be slightly more, but 2010 is an election where I would say this is not a fair estimation. The Republican Party only took about a 2.4% lead in the polling averages. On Election Day, what you found was that USA Today had Democrats up, but then you had the Associated Press with the Republicans up, and then you had Pew Research with the Democrats up. Then ABC News said that the Republicans were up. CNN said the Democrats were up. CBS said that the Republicans were up. Then Fox said the Democrats were up. It was a whiplash, right? Back and forth, back and forth. NBC News comes out with a tie, and guess what happens? The GOP wins by 6. Not only did they completely move outside the margin of error, but they did so by a drastic margin. Even Donald Trump's polling errors were not as inaccurately predicted as the 2014 midterm election. So I wouldn't exactly use this as a baseline. But 2010, I think, is different. 2010 is a year in which what we found was that the Republican Party actually was doing better than expected. And I mean that relative to Barack Obama's approval rating. In 2010, leading into those midterm elections, actually, in the beginning of the year, the Republican Party wasn't defeating the Democrats substantially. And that's because Barack Obama, I don't know why I'm mixing up the two, obviously, I think because they served together, but I should not be. Barack Obama was approved of by, a few percentage points at different points in time. And, it was only until about Election Day that Barack Obama became disapproved of by about 4 percentage points. What you found, actually, was that the GOP won by about 7 points. Now, maybe it's something to say that the approval rating doesn't always matter for the generic congressional vote, but it is something to point out that there is a negative 14 net approval for Joe Biden and just a +4 win for the GOP according to the generic congressional vote. I mean, honestly speaking, what we are going to find is that if the Republican Party doesn't do some type of major takeaway, the Democrats could actually end up doing as well as they did in 2020. And I mean that in means of they could potentially retain control of the House of Representatives, considering the fact that our brand new congressional maps now favor the Democratic Party more. And I've talked about this as something that was really mind-warping, because the redistricting across the nation never should have favored the Democratic Party. The Republican Party had 100 more seats to draw than the Democratic Party, and yet somehow the Democratic Party ends up with additional Biden seats in this new map than in the old one. That if you were to take all of the remaining states and add all of the Biden districts up to the already gerrymandered map, what you would find is that Democrats actually would expand their House majority to 230 seats. So if we're working at a position where the minimum for Democrats in terms of Biden won districts in the last election was 230 under the new House lines, what you're going to find is that the Republican Party will have more territory to fight in. For instance, in the state of Illinois, the Republican Party has already been effectively cut out of 2 seats here. They are going to have to contest 2 seats elsewhere because Democrats took a seat away from them. Now, the GOP also tried to do that for Democrats in Ohio. They tried to do it in North Carolina. It didn't work. It was struck down by the courts, and we will see what new map is posed there. But Democrats lost a seat in Tennessee, so that counteracts one in Illinois. Democrats look like they're going to lose one in the state of Kansas, or potentially a few in the state of Florida. That's up for consideration. Maybe that's a possibility. But at the end of the day, the brand new map disadvantages the GOP more, despite them supposed to have expand where they were right now. Redistricting alone was supposed to hand the Republican Party the House majority. The state of Florida alone had the ability to do so. Had Republicans wanted to gerrymander it into oblivion, they could have. You know why? Because the Florida Supreme Court is one of the most partisan, Republican-leaning courts where Ron DeSantis has had the most say out of any governor in recent history as to who ends up on the Florida Supreme Court. You bring a challenge to them, and while they shot down his advisory request, when it truly matters, I think they would side with him, because this is a Republican court. But instead, the Republicans are deciding to play it fair, or at least as fair as they could be. The map that has just been released from the House in the state of Florida was 18 Trump seats in 2020 and 10 for Biden. But get this, that is actually the more aggressive gerrymander. 18 to 10 doesn't sound too bad in a state that could easily be somewhere similar to New York. You could potentially be in a position where it's 22 to 6. That's something I wouldn't expect, to be out of the realm of possibility for the GOP. And another thing that I do want to say about that most aggressive gerrymander is that actually that map ends up with 14 Hillary Clinton districts and 14 Donald Trump districts. Just food for thought. But moving beyond this point, what we are finding is that no matter where you look, the Republican Party is not taking away the same way that Democrats did in 2018, the same way that Republicans did in 2014, the same way that Republicans did in 2010, the same way that Democrats did in 2006. I think what we are finding is that voters in this country either disapprove of Biden and are going to vote for Democrats, or are apprehensive about backing the GOP. Regardless of what it is, the GOP is failing to tap into an electorate that they more consistently have won in the past, considering a Democratic president. What you found was the Republican Revolution in 1994. The Republicans picked up control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years. What you found in 2006 was that Democrats flipped both chambers. 2010, Republicans flipped the House. 2014, they flipped the Senate. 2018, Democrats flipped the House. This is what happens. This is what always happens. And the Republican Party, unfortunately for them, I cannot say now definitively that they are going to perform as well as they should be. I mean, this red wave is more of a facade right now than an actuality. I don't deny the GOP is going to win control of the House, but that's a very, very, very low bar. The Democrats have a 5-seat advantage over that majority. It means absolutely nothing. To treat this as, the Republicans winning the House being some type of wave and monumental year, that's not true. The Democrats in 2016 won just 194 seats in the House, and then in 2018 won 235. Based off of this new House map, it's going to be very difficult to see the GOP over 230. Extremely difficult. Even if they are to replicate a year like 2010, that's the only type of situation where I think that we would see a House majority for the GOP that is super, super large. And polling data does seem to be pretty accurate recently. In the state of Virginia, one person might say, okay, well, Joe Biden was disapproved of, and that resulted in a Republican victory in the state of Virginia. But get this, Glenn Youngkin was supposed to win by the polls. There were polls that indicated that New Jersey was going to narrow up. Right before Election Day, I made a video talking about it because somehow a poll had been released that showed Phil Murphy ahead by just 7 points, and I thought that it was out of the ordinary. And it was. Not necessarily out of the ordinary, but it was out of the ordinary for New Jersey. And the result ended up being the Democrats +4, and the polls were accurate in the state of Virginia. So we can't really pick and choose what polls to trust. On one hand, one might argue, that the Republicans are actually ahead by significantly more and that the polls are throttling the Republican voice, but then are the same ones who agree that the polls show that Joe Biden is down. I think that we do need to take these all into consideration. But the fact remains, not only in CNN, but in many of these other pollsters, what you will find is that the approval rating for Biden is so down, And yet, on the same question of the generic ballot, Republicans can't even seem to get a substantial lead. Or if they do, it's counteracted by other polls showing that the average is somewhere around Republicans +4. I think this is something that definitely deserves further investigation by the GOP. What are they doing wrong? Why can't they win over voters the same way they did in years past? Maybe it's the association with President Trump. Maybe it's the association with a brand new Republican Party. Maybe it's the association with January 6th. Who knows what it is? The Democratic Party has done a very good job at reducing the GOP's legitimacy, making them seem like out-of-touch elites, which is something they have done since Mitt Romney, even before then, obviously, because that is just partisan politics. Both sides have tried to do that to each other at different points in time. But I think more recently what we have found is that in painting a certain political party as more radical, more extreme, the Democrats have succeeded in doing that for the GOP, which is why the GOP struggles at winning over voters in a way that they never used to in the past. And I think this is something that definitely deserves some, continued discussion, definitely deserves some continued questioning. And I think the GOP definitely needs to reevaluate their strategy ahead of 2022. Otherwise, sure, they could win the House with an advantage of about Republican +4, but the Democrats could retain control of the Senate. The Republicans want to flip both chambers for a reason, because that would throttle Joe Biden truly. If there was another Supreme Court retirement, they could block him until the next election. They can't do that if they don't have the Senate. You could also see that potentially if Democrats luck out and win back both chambers, or I guess hold on to both chambers, Republicans are powerless for 2 additional years. And for the GOP, God forbid that the Democrats get some more extreme members in their party that are willing to get rid of old provisions like the filibuster and a very quick vote. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. I don't know why I just couldn't figure out that for a second. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.